Well, welcome everyone to our online program on addiction and recovery from the Sunshine Coast Health Center up here in Powell River, British Columbia. And our topic is going to be the opioid crisis. In British Columbia in particular, we have this thing which the media has labeled the opioid crisis. And that's revolving around all of these very sad deaths from using these drugs called opioids. But I want to look at it as an example of how we make sense of drug use and how we deal with it. Right? So just to give you some background. So a lot of people have died from this drug called fentanyl. Okay, and fentanyl is classified as an opioid. Okay, in the old days, I mean, we've given various names to these drugs like narcotics, opiates. An opiate was typically like a natural derivative of opium, such as morphine. And an opioid was reserved for a synthetic version, such as fentanyl, this drug of great concern now. Today, we tend to just lump them all together. And we just call the whole stuff, give it the classification of opioid. So that's what an opioid drug is. It's like heroin, morphine, fentanyl, carfentanil, codeine, things like that. And what is disconcerting is that in spite of all the energy we've been putting into trying to deal with this crisis, really beginning last year in 2016, it doesn't look like we're making a lot of headway. Okay, so let me just give you some numbers. These come from the British Columbia Coroner Service. So between January the 1st, 2017 and September 2017, there were 914 overdose deaths due directly to illegal drug use, of which fentanyl was detected among those drugs, because the majority of overdose deaths were like a concoction of drugs, of which fentanyl was one of those drugs. So the majority of deaths weren't people just taking fentanyl. They were taking various drugs and fentanyl being part of it. And it's very sad because that number I gave you, 914, that's a 147% increase over the same period last year. So in spite of all of these hours, all of these millions of dollars poured in to deal with this crisis, the number of deaths has actually increased. So I thought we'd take a look at our response to this and just, we'll see what it is and see if we're missing anything in the response. So one thing I keep reading about is this concept that we have to educate the drug users. And the thinking seems to be something along the lines of, well, you know, if drug users just understood how dangerous a drug fentanyl really is, you know, they wouldn't take it, right? Because it's too risky, too dangerous. Which is an interesting way of making sense of things, right? Because one of the things that we're now aware of is that as the media publicized more and more of these deaths from fentanyl, these overdose deaths, what we discovered is the fentanyl dealers were doing more and more business. In other words, it seemed like this great advertising for it, because it was the very potency that was appealing. In fact, I worked with one client who told me, tongue-in-cheek, of course, but the point, what he told me was that I consider myself ripped off if I don't have fentanyl mixed in with my drugs. Right? It's that kind of idea, right, that seems to be missing in this whole thrust of educating people, right? Maybe it's something to do with drug users that when they hear about a powerful drug, they actually, well, this is great, we got to go get some. It's the very potency that is going to appeal to a lot of opioid users. Anyway, this is a kind of idea that confuses, I think, a lot of people. That they tend to think that somehow they just don't know, and if they just knew about it, and one of the other things I remember reading in the newspaper, that one fellow had overdosed 17 times. Well, it's a pretty odds-on bet that he actually understands the potential consequence, and yet he continues to do it, right? It's one of these mystery things that maybe education, might help like non-addicted people, But it's really questionable whether how much help it's going to give for people who are willing and attracted to this drug fentanyl. Anyway, that's it for this program, and we'll be back next time with another episode.